All right, well, welcome to you if you're joining us from wherever you are. My name's Andy. I'm part of the team at Croydon Vineyard, and I'm really delighted today to be joined by Dr Kate Middleton. She's a psychologist, part of the Mind and Soul Foundation, a pastor at Zoe Church, author of several books, and we're delighted to have you with us today, Kate. Thanks so much for joining us.
Thank you so much, Andy. I must just clarify, because Zoe Church is a big one in America, and much as I would love to be based there, it's Zeo Church in Hertfordshire, which is obviously just as exciting, but just a flip of those letters. It's just to confuse you.
Yeah, that's great. And I first came across you, Kate, at the Vineyard National Leaders Conference in January up in Nottingham. So I kind of went along to these seminars in the afternoon, and you sort of think, okay, what have you got for us? Maybe I'll have a little snooze. We'll see. But within about 90 seconds of you speaking, I suddenly thought, this person knows what they're talking about, and this is very, very helpful. And I got my notebook out and started making notes, and it was just absolute gold. And then a couple of weeks ago, the Vineyard Youth Network put on a conference call with you, and you were speaking into issues around lockdown, just helping out all the youth ministers in the Vineyard. And it was so helpful that I said to myself, we've got to get Kate Middleton on for Croydon Vineyard if we can. And I'm really, really just thrilled that you were able to make the time for us. So thank you.
Yeah, well, it's great to be able to join you. It's one of the advantages of doing everything via Zoom, isn't it? That I'm able to be beamed in.
So just give us a little bit about your background, maybe how you came to faith and what your professional life has looked like and what's brought you to where you are now.
Okay, great. So yeah, but I actually started out as a medic, trained first as a medic and then retrained as a psychologist. I didn't grow up in a Christian background at all. My family aren't from a church background or anything like that. I mean, I came into contact with stuff of the church just because the only other kid in my village when I was growing up was the vicar's daughter. So that was literally my first introduction to the church, was sitting outside church on my bike waiting for the service to finish so she could come and play. And eventually they invited me in, and it literally changed the rest of my life. So I went off and studied medicine, but always felt a wider call and a passion about this whole area of emotional and mental health. And for me, that's not just what it means to be unwell, but what I'm really passionate about is this question of the way our amazing mind and brain was designed, and what does it mean, therefore, to really flourish and thrive, to get the best out of your mind, to release the full potential of everything that you are created as a person, but also this amazing partnership that we get to do with God, and how can we carry that really well so that we can see the full potential of what God longs to do through us as well. And I'm particularly interested in how we do that well as people, sometimes living and journeying through challenging times, whether that's just what life is throwing at us or whether it is wider context. And our current season has been a really just extreme and unusual example of that, really, of how do we manage these sorts of times? What does it mean to not just survive difficult times like lockdown and global pandemic, but is it possible even to thrive? How do we take positive stuff out of that? And how do we support not just ourselves well through that stuff, but the people who we have responsibilities for? Maybe we're in leadership positions, or maybe we're parenting. We've got a role to input into other people's lives as well. And what does that mean as people of God to bring good stuff and to bring more of life and flourishing and thriving to other people?
Amazing. So let's pick up on lockdown then straight away. Obviously, I haven't met a single person who hasn't faced some sort of challenge out of the season that we're in. But what is it about the lockdown? When we're speaking today, we're just kind of hearing in the news some bits are starting to ease a little bit. But what is it about lockdown? What are the particular mental health challenges people are facing, and why is that?
I mean, lockdown is, I'm going to have to use the overused, unprecedented word, but I promise not to say it again. But it is that, just because of some of the aspects of what this has has created the type of challenge that we've all gone into. And really what happened when lockdown initially kicked off, what is it, like 10 weeks ago? I've lost count somewhere along the line. But it was the speed with which something so dramatic happened that had such wide-ranging impact on really every aspect of our lives and on all people. So it is everyone, everywhere, everything, all at once, changed in a moment, and a total disruption to our normal routine, which has a huge impact on us as human beings. And that, combined with the specific challenges that lockdown has brought, particularly around the pressures on our social connection, it's affected so many of just our basic needs as human beings: the need to be productive, the need to have routine, but also the need to connect with other people, the need to not be doing things in isolation. And I think that has put pressure on us all. And I think there has been variation in how that's felt. And that too has been a challenge. So that the gaps and the differences that have opened up and how we've had to try and hold those. So for some people, they would openly say that actually lockdown has been quite a positive experience for them. They've maybe been furloughed. And if they're lucky enough not to have worries about the long-term stability of their job, that's meant a month, maybe a couple of months literally off, sitting in the sunshine. See people doing their garden or reading a lot of books or whatever it is they're doing. But for other people, this has been a time of extreme challenge. Maybe they're frontline workers or juggling work and homeschooling. It's a time that's actually been about feeling pushed to the absolute maximum, to the limit. And I'm speaking to a lot of people who feel really on the edge of burnout here. Or there are some people for whom lockdown has pushed them into circumstances that are incredibly emotionally difficult. If you're shielding and you're not able to leave your house, or if you are disconnected and isolated from people that you love. You know, some of us are lucky enough to be in isolation with our families, with the people who we're closest to are in our households. But what if you're not? And that's been very, very difficult for some people, and those gaps have been difficult, combined with a time when we're all under pressure and stress. And what that means is that we're all on the edge of overwhelm. So everybody's been perhaps at different times throughout this 10-week period, but most of us have had seasons where we felt on the edge. We've been more prickly than usual, more reactive than usual. So we're juggling more emotions as well in a season where we don't have some of our usual coping strategies to deal with them.
Amazing. And we'll maybe talk about some of the specific scenarios people find themselves in. Is there any general advice, kind of just everybody pretty much across the board, this would be good things to know at the moment, or this would be good things to do at the moment, that would apply widely?
Yeah, I mean, there's general tips and things that are important and are worth holding on to. And I think understanding what's underneath them is key. I mean, one of the biggest challenges of lockdown has been the change to our baseline stress level. And I think a lot of the time people misunderstand what stress is when we're talking about it, because what they think of is distress. They think, am I upset? Am I stressed out by this? And whilst for some people the answer to that would be yes, actually, this is really difficult. There's a lot of people who think, well, I'm not really, I'm just bored, or, it's annoying, but I'm not particularly stressed out by it. But what we need to recognize is the level of change and disruption that we're all dealing with. And interestingly, we're talking right now at a season where there is another level of change coming in. And what that does is it requires extra work of your brain. And stress is actually, physiologically speaking, anything that requires your brain or your body to respond, to adjust, to analyze. And so every time something changes that affects your world, it requires quite a lot of your mind. And this is why this season has actually raised everybody's stress levels, not because we're necessarily distressed by it, but because of the need to reassess what this means to how we do life. So your brain looks to its normal routine as part of the way that it keeps its stress level down. It's a bit like climbing a wall, and you just automatically reach for certain handholds. And as long as they're there, then you can do that climb without thinking. But when things are different and everything's moved around and you're having to be much more analytical about what you do, how you do it, how that fits into your day or your week, that's requiring a lot more work of your mind. And I think that's one of the things that has been challenging about the whole COVID crisis has not necessarily been the things that have been distressing, although they are difficult, but just the level of work and change and adjustment that it's requiring. And in this season, I'm hearing from a lot of people who actually are finding that really hard. You'd think going back to normal in inverted commas, because it's not really normal, is it? But going back to normal, I think a lot of people think that would be the easier bit. Going into lockdown would be hard, going into normal would be easy. But actually in some weird ways it's almost the other way around, because going into lockdown was very clear cut. The message was clear, the actions were clear, just do nothing, stay in your house. And although that was challenging, this season now of trying to work out how do we do something that looks like normal whilst also holding the challenges of COVID, the distancing, whilst making decisions around potential risks. So do we want to send our kids to school or don't we? Do we want to go to work or don't we? Do we take public transport or don't we? There's a lot of brain work there. And again, what that's meaning is that it's raising people's stress levels. And what's interesting about physiological stress is it's on the same physiological system, the same biological system as emotions like frustration and anxiety. So if your baseline on that system raises, then your proneness to those sorts of emotion also rises. So again, we become more prickly, our tolerance level drops. Maybe we're finding that anxiety is bubbling to the surface more than it normally would, or that we are just more irritable than normal. We're finding it harder to manage small things. And so in the midst of that, how you deal with those emotions then becomes its own challenge as well.
Yeah, I think on the Vineyard Youth Leaders Conference, you gave the image quite a lot of feeling up to our neck in it, like water, and therefore any little wave that comes in is suddenly very threatening because of potential overwhelm. So help us out. What do we do? What good things are good to put in place?
It's an evocative image, that one. I often say if you think of your level on that physiological stress system is very complex. So it's a massive oversimplification, so apologies for it. But if you think of it like the water level in a pool, your baseline level ideally normally is quite low, so sort of somewhere ankle to knee region. And there, yeah, the everyday stress waves of life, just the little things that life throws at you, they're manageable. But what we've got here as our baseline has risen, particularly if you're juggling lots of things in the moment, lots of different challenges, lots of different change coming in, is that yes, we all have this crisis level, which is a bit like when it comes up to the neck, and the risk then is that something little pushes you over the edge. So you're trying to deal with a work email and one of your kids comes in with the latest question about their maths schoolwork, and you just think, I can't take this. Something that little normally wouldn't bother you, but in that moment you just think, this is the thing that's going to push me over the edge. And when we're in that place, what we need to do is think about how can we drop that overall baseline. So the challenge becomes one of thinking about how can we do probably three main things, I would think. And the first thing is about how can we re-implement routine into our week, because the more you can get back into some kind of predictable routine that your brain expects and it knows what to expect, that will drop your stress level to some degree. So the normal weeks just tick by, don't they, if you think about it, because you don't have to think about them much. Things just happen on certain days. Each day, certain things just happen at certain times. The more you can get back some of that predictability, that will help drop your stress level. The second thing is about rest and relaxation. So that's like pulling the plug out of that pool and letting the level drop down. And the challenge for a lot of us in that is that all of our life has been pushed into one space right now, particularly if you're isolating or shielding, or if you're still working from home, if you're juggling work, homeschooling, lots of things in the same space. Because then getting away, finding headspace, finding moments where you can rest and relax is challenging. And the risk is that what you think is, I'll do everything I have to do, and then if I have time, I'll relax. And that means you never do it, because especially if you are juggling lots of those different demands right now. I know I've got 2 kids at home and all sorts of different things going on. You just don't find time unless you prioritize that rest. So I'm trying to put those moments in my week into my diary first, because otherwise I know they'll get pushed out. And although it might feel like those are moments of doing nothing, actually they are the moments that fuel everything else you do. Because if you can keep your stress level lower, you'll handle things so much better. You'll be so much more able to concentrate and focus on the other things that require something of you. When you're at overwhelm, when your stress level's high, it affects so much. It affects your ability to concentrate, because your mind is on this sort of high alert. So it doesn't want to focus too much on one thing in case you miss something vital going on around you. So if you're trying to focus on work and get work done, actually taking that time out to relax and dropping your stress level will really help, as well as it helping you from avoid overwhelm, responding well to the people around you, not shouting at too many people you're supposed to be working with, or your poor kids who are just trying to ask you for that help with their maths problem. And then the third thing is then dealing with those emotions. Like, how do you express and process the challenging emotions that you're dealing with right now? So it might be frustration. There's so much frustration right now. You know, we had a thing the other week where in the middle of a fraught week, our Wi-Fi started to go down. It's just like, are you kidding me? Like, I can't handle this right now. Just the level of frustration that caused in our household. Loss, just accepting the things that we've lost in our everyday life, the friendships that we've lost, the connection. You know, I know we're able to keep in touch with people via Zoom or phone calls, but it's not the same. We've lost physical contact. We've lost a lot of the social fun of life. So allowing ourselves to admit that and to express it, and the sort of grief of that moment. And also anxiety, and particularly in this season, a lot of people are struggling with that. You know, the communication in the beginning of lockdown was so powerfully about stay home because that's where you're safe. And now we're in a season where we are being encouraged to go back to some normal life, to go back to work. The shops are reopening, where the kids, some of them are starting to go back to school. Now, inevitably, most people will experience some anxiety because they've learned because it was 8 to 10 weeks, that's a long enough block of time that we have learned to associate being at home with being safe. So leaving home can trigger natural anxiety. It's your brain's way of warning you that this might be something significant that you're doing, that there might be a risk associated with it. And so we're going to have to manage that anxiety and try to process the decisions that we make and the level of risk that we're willing to work with. And so doing that well, finding spaces where we can discuss and share about some of those difficult emotions, that's important. But also trying to find spaces where we can focus on positive stuff that is still there, and doing the stuff that triggers the good stuff. You know, that's actually a surprising challenge of lockdown. So many of us, the things that we would do that are just fun in life have kind of gone. You know, I was saying to my daughter the other day, I've become the most boring person in lockdown. And we need to rediscover in this new season ways of having fun, because that's really important for good mental health, just as much as avoiding the negative stuff that triggers the positive, you know. So all of those things can help, but it's working out how to do them, isn't it, in this new season?
Yeah, so let's talk about rest a little bit more. That was the second of your things that we can be doing. I mean, the huge temptation is kind of mindless escapism, isn't it? It's Netflix and, well, for me, it's Netflix and a beer, which is okay sometimes, but maybe talk to us a little bit more about what should healthy rest look like? What kind of good things can we be doing even when we're staying at home as much as possible? What restores us?
Yeah, well, it's interesting, isn't it? And if we think about like the origins of why we need to rest as people of God, it's really interesting to come from that foundation. And right from the beginning of the Old Testament, we see this pattern that when God's creating the world, he works 6 days and he rests one. And there's that intrinsic rhythm built into who we are. We know that as people, we are created in the image of God. We're created reflecting the nature of God, and we carry the same things in our DNA that our Creator carries, and one of those is that need for the rhythm and the balance of those two things, work but also rest, and feeling like we do those things well. One of the other challenges for a lot of people of lockdown is that the loss of productivity, which is a basic human need to feel like we're being productive, we're doing something that has a purpose. And we have to balance that with our seasons of rest and try and do those well. And so one of the challenges is having those clean boundaries, because everything's been thrown into one. The risk is that we feel like we're sort of mashing everything together and doing nothing well. So we're not really working well. We're not really resting well. So trying to get back into our life that degree of routine and some boundaried spaces where we are doing one thing and doing it with a degree of focus, whether it's working or homeschooling or resting or whatever it is, that's definitely a challenge. And then when we think about the rest aspect, it's interesting to look at the words that are used in the Old Testament when it talks about the commandment of rest, because it is a commandment. And we forget that, in the 10 commandments, the Sabbath day, taking that day out, taking a day that is in the Hebrew that is set apart, that's different from the other days of your week, that is for rest, for connecting with God, for something special. That's a commandment that actually, if you look in the order, it comes above things like do not murder. Now, I don't know about you, I'm doing reasonably well on do not murder, although, it is lockdown and I am 10 weeks into sharing a house with my family. So on some days when I'm very grumpy, it's been a bit risky. But we generally do quite well at most of the other commands, but we forget the Sabbath ones so easily. And yet it is a commandment. And it comes from that rhythm that God shows of work and rest. That Hebrew word that's translated, that's used first of all, talking about God's rhythm of work and rest, in when the 10 commandments are given, literally means that God has quiet time. It literally means he lies down. There's a physicality to that rest. It is about physically resting, but it is also about quiet. It's about headspace. It's about release. And it's interesting that from the start, that commandment to take that time out is repeated again and again. And it's almost like the people, even way back in Old Testament times, they struggle with it. They need reminding, just like we do. This is important. You need to do this. Don't forget to do this. So in Exodus 31, the command is repeated, but saying, even in the times of harvesting and ploughing, when you're really busy, when life is frenetic, when you feel flat out, you must rest. And interestingly, in that verse, it's a different Hebrew word that's used, and it's a stronger word, and it literally means stop. You must stop, cease, desist, stop the things that you're doing, whatever it is that you're so busy with. Have some times in your week when you stop. So rest is about things that are physically relaxing, that are physiologically relaxing. We have to think about that. We hold the physical tension of stress in our bodies because it's a whole body response. So what physically relax you, particularly emotions like frustration, tension, stress, where you can literally feel yourself, you're so frustrated. How do you physically drop that stress and tension level in your body? But it also needs to be about emotional escape. You talk about distraction there, and that is actually a really important thing. And in this season, that's an interesting challenge to us, because it's hard to escape the things that are hounding us right now. The worries, the anxieties of COVID, of the decisions that we're having to make, but also the many things that we're juggling. And a lot of people I'm talking to are finding that distraction, the sort of cognitive challenge of stop. How do you stop your mind just ticking over and over all the things that you're trying to juggle, all the plates you've got in the air, all the things that you're trying to remember and get right, and the decisions you're having to make? That's actually really hard. So looking at how do we distract ourselves and how can we combine that with something that's physically relaxing. And also to get away, to get the chance to maybe find spaces that are not spaces we associate with work or some of the things that are stressful in life. And that's difficult because, as I say, life has become very sort of meshed up together. Everything happens in the same space. So we have to be creative. A lot of people are finding that the things they usually do to rest or relax either just aren't open to them or aren't working. And so we have to look at how can we tweak and adjust the things that we do to relax and try totally new things, because maybe in this season there's things that might work that don't usually work, or that usually wouldn't work but actually do now. It is about being creative and trying new stuff.
Amazing. Let's talk about a couple of specific situations. So the family, several people in one home. There's obviously a bit of a pressure cooker aspect. For those that are living with others, what are some of the key challenges, and how do we navigate those?
That's an interesting question. I think the main thing that I'm hearing from a lot of people about, whether it's family context or even in workplace contexts, or shared households, students living together, wherever people are together at the moment, is the issue around conflict. And I think if you think of your emotions and your stress on a sort of 0 to 10 scale, and then imagine that your baseline has risen up. So, and then there's a challenge like your child comes in with the maths homework question, or I don't know, choose the thing that annoys you the most irrationally. So someone has stacked the dishwasher the wrong way. I mean, just why? Why would you do that? That drives me crazy. But those sort of things might just be a 1 point sort of trigger on that scale. It pushes you 1 point further up. Now, if you were at 1 or 2 anyway, that 1 point is fine. But we all have a point on that scale where it's called the hijack zone, or psychologists often call it that, because it's your brain's sort of high alert stage, and that's where the possibility is that the situation is so severe, so knife edge, so important, so critical that it requires an instant reaction from you. And what happens then when you're in that zone, so it's about 8 to 10 on that 0 to 10 scale, is that your ability to think and rationalize, your thinking brain, is actually turned right down. And it becomes much more about instinctive responses, because really this is your brain saying now is not the time to think about this. You just need to deal with the situation. And it's where our most basic fight or flight instincts can come in, either to hit out, to shout, to flounce out. It's the door slamming zone, or whether it is running away, it's the panicking, it's the withdrawing, it's the I just can't take this zone. And the problem is, in that zone you don't think terribly clearly, and if we're on the edge of that zone anyway, if our baseline has risen up to 7 or 8, you're so close, it doesn't take a lot to push you into that. And so in the family context, in group contexts, those are the moments when people they lose it, they freak out. And if someone, you might, maybe particularly if you're the parent in the situation, although may I add that as parents we are also in that, and some of the most teenage behavior in my household in the last 2-3 weeks has come from the adults in my household and not the teenager, because we're all in this situation. But if someone tries to reason with you, it just doesn't work, because your reasoning brain has switched right down. In fact, it's likely to make you even crosser or push you even further up that scale. So I think it's about awareness for us as individuals when we're pushing close to that zone, to be able to say, do you know what? I am so about to freak out and it's not your fault. Give me a second. Because the only thing we can do when we've pushed into that zone is withdraw, get some space, just to take a moment, drop those levels down. It's in that phase where you're on the edge and you start to feel in your head, we've all done it, you just think, I am so about to lose it. And any minute now, I'm going to lose control. That's the time to bail. That's the time to just go have a cup of tea on the back step, walk around the garden if you can get out of your house, or go to a quiet room. Go lock yourself in the toilet if you need to, just to take a moment to calm down. Because otherwise, if you get pushed into that hijack zone, the likelihood is you're going to have a situation that probably isn't going to be that positive. It's probably not going to go anywhere that is that good. And that doesn't mean that you just withdraw and say, I'm not having this conversation at all, full stop. it is about planning better times to have the difficult conversations, because we are all on top of one another, trying to plan ahead, trying to do that routine so that we can all get the things that we all feel like we need in order to survive through this season. And that might just be like everybody needs their slot on the Wi-Fi, but probably not at the same time, because if my 8-year-old is trying to stream his Roblox at the same time that my 15-year-old is trying to Zoom her friends, and I'm also trying to do something like this, that's not going to work. And so trying to work out how we can fit in together across when there's a lot of complicated different dynamics. So having those conversations regularly instead of waiting until somebody somewhere gets to the point of hijack and loses it.
So helpful. What about for those who are not living with others, so they've been alone for quite a long time, feelings of isolation, feelings of anxiety? Where can we go with that?
And I think this is it is a really genuine challenge. So if you're watching this and you've been shielding or you've been very isolated, maybe you live on your own, then just my heart goes out to you, really. And I just want to validate what you're feeling. You're finding this hard because it is hard. And I think it's really important that we understand that. So many people I'm speaking to now in lovely ways are saying to me, oh, well, lots of people have it worse. I mustn't wallow. And we don't want to wallow in an unhelpful way, but at the same time, acknowledging that this is hard and allowing yourself space to say, actually, this is what I'm feeling, and finding some spaces where you can express that, and particularly to grieve the things that you've lost in this season. That is actually important, and it's emotionally healthy. Positivity is really good, but positivity doesn't mean that you have to deny or suppress the more difficult emotions. Actually being able to say some of this is hard, and there are still some good things in life, but there are some things that I've lost that are really difficult. So that's the first thing. The second thing is to be as creative as you can about where you can make connections, where and how, and to do that in as many different ways as possible. And the risk is that we become quite all or nothing in it because it's painful. So we think, I can't hug my grandchildren or my best friend, so I just can't bear to have contact with them at all. I'm just going to wait until this is all over, and that would work if this was a short-term acute challenge like 2-3 weeks, but we're already way further into it than this. And for people who are in that highest risk shielding category, we don't know how much longer that might continue for. So we need to be creative about thinking about how we can do that, abiding by the rules and the good advice that we get, but trying new ways of making contact and doing it regularly, perhaps scheduling in, because you might not feel like doing it, but it is important that you have those regular connection points with people, so that you don't become too isolated. And recognizing that we know that one of the things that isolation does is it does create issues around emotions like anxiety, which can start to bubble to the surface. So again, finding spaces where you can express and process that stuff is really important. And that might be those phone calls with a good mate or someone else who is also isolating, so really understands what that feels like. And I guess, Andy, the last thing I would say is just for those of us who aren't in that situation, and particularly as life goes back to something that resembles normal, it's so important that we don't forget the people who are still isolated, who are still shielding. It's so important that we're very deliberate and intentional about remembering them and about empathizing with them, because otherwise that sense of being forgotten, of being lost, of being left behind just adds more pain to their situation. So that we remember the people we know and love who are still separated from real life, and that we make the effort to connect with them where we can, and just to be sensitive about what we're posting, what we're talking about, what we're articulating, what we're sharing, whether that's social media or whatever context that is, that we remember there are some people whose situations are really different and still difficult.
Mm-hmm. So we're recording this, I'm not sure when it will go out, but it's just been the weekend with the whole Dominic Cummings thing, and that's provoked an incredible amount of anger, kind of online vitriol, I wonder, just as a psychologist, if you could speak into why this is stirring up such emotion and healthy ways to handle that.
I think, I think what's interesting about that situation is that it has triggered some of the emotions that stem from this difference. And I think, as I've already said, one of the challenges of this season have been the gaps that have opened up between people for whom there are things that are easier and people for whom there are things that are really acutely, intensely difficult, whether that is that a loved one's in hospital and you can't go and visit them, or personal circumstances and challenges around juggling the needs of children or the demands of life, or whether it is about isolation, about your own personal difficulties. We're in very different situations. Even economically, there are some people for whom this hasn't made a big difference to income, to financial situations. There are other people who are facing financial ruin because of this, people whose businesses have been destroyed by it, people who have either already lost jobs or know they're going to, people who are struggling not just with how they're going to get their Ocado order, but they don't have money to pay for the next set of shopping that they need to get in for their household. You know, the differences are acute. And what we've seen, particularly on social media in recent days, has been an outpouring of that, the frustration and the hurt that can cause when they see someone who's in a situation that feels freer, that feels better. And it feels like there isn't compassion and empathy towards those whose situations are much, much more difficult. So I think that is going to be one of the challenges of this next season, is how do we hold that difference well? And how do those of us who are lucky enough to be in situations that are not so challenging, how do we reach out to those who are in a different situation to us? How do we empathize? How do we hold the feelings for those for whom it's difficult? How do we manage the challenges for those people? And remembering that not all of those emotions are external. We might not realize how hard this is for someone. There might be someone you know really well who you think actually locked down, they've had a pretty smooth run through it, but actually underneath there might be things they're struggling with that you know nothing about. I know in the work that we do at Mind and Soul Foundation, we hear about a lot of people struggling emotionally, struggling with mental health, struggling with addiction or things like that, where a lot of their family and friends have no idea that this stuff is going on beneath the surface. So we have to be aware that there may be other people around us who are not as okay as they seem, and be sensitive to that.
Amazing. So just really one more group of people I'd like to ask you about is our young people, our teenagers. There'll be quite a few of them watching this from our Alive youth group, and you spoke just fascinatingly and very, very helpfully to all the youth leaders in the Vineyard movement about why this is a particularly challenging time for young people, and maybe you could give some encouragement as well.
Yeah, I mean, my number one encouragement to young people, just to say, well done. You know, I've had some amazing conversations with young people who have totally just handled lockdown amazingly well, and who have adapted and adjusted so well. One of the amazing things about the teenage brain, we know that it's changing a lot, that it's a time when there's a dramatic amount of changing and fine-tuning of the brain. And we hear an awful lot of negativity about that, about the challenges of the teenage years. But what we've seen in lockdown is one of the big pluses is that teenagers are often much more up for change than we are as adults. We are much more set in our ways. We've basically been doing life like this for the last 20 years. Don't mess with us. Whereas the teenagers are much more up for giving something new a go. And we have seen that adaptability, that flexibility, the positivity that a lot of teenagers bring to things, it really coming into its own in this stage. So I've seen teenagers who have been amazing with stuff they've done and who have handled it a lot better than I feel like I have, actually. The challenges of doing homeschooling, which a lot of teenagers have faced, getting school work sent to them, having to restructure, manage their own motivation, plan their timetabling, do that well. I've been so impressed. I have a role as a school governor, and I've been so impressed by what I've seen from the teenagers in school and the way that they've managed and responded to that. So just well done to the teens who are out there. And at the same time, what I want to say is, if you're finding this hard, then remember that's okay. That is a sign that you're human. Loads of us are finding it hard. You're probably sharing a household with adults who are finding it hard. And they might be a bit more yelly than normal, because actually this is difficult for all of us. So again, it's a similar message to the one that I've been sharing for adults, but just with a bit more leeway. We need to recognize that some of the things that the teenage brain is still learning, still developing the adult ability with, although, like I say, as adults, many people still struggle with this stuff. Some of those things are things that are particularly challenged by lockdown. Things like, how do you motivate yourself? How do you focus your attention? And if you're not going to school anymore, you've not got classes you have to turn up for, you've not got something you have to get out of bed for, because if you're late for registration, you'll get detention. The onus is much more on you to self-motivate, and that's hard for some teens. So we need to recognize those of us who are the adults in the households that we might need to help with that. And for teenagers, again, it's about creativity and exploring how to do that better. How you deal with some of these emotions. I talked about that 0 to 10 scale. Teenage emotions flare up much more quickly, and they're triggered more easily by particular things, because their brains are sort of focused on change that's associated with those things. So things like stuff around relationships, social context, because one of the challenges of the teenage years is to learn how to do adult relationships. Teenage brains are obsessed with relationship. Who's getting on with who's friends with who said what to who. So social stuff is much more emotionally triggering for a teenager than it is for an adult. So on that 0 to 10 scale, teenagers are more prone to the higher end. They're more prone to being hijacked, to those moments where they just freak out or lose it in the moment or feel overwhelmed by their emotions. But it is about remembering that in those moments, it often isn't as bad as it feels. You are just being hijacked by your own brain, by your own emotions. Taking time out, taking time to let the emotional level drop down, trying not to make massive life decisions when you're in that hijack zone, trying not to say anything that you'll regret too much later. Instead, withdraw yourself from the situation, calm yourself down. And therefore, for the teenagers, the same patterns that we're seeing as adults, the same questions. How can you build routine into your week? What are the things that you do that are about rest and relaxation, that are about getting away from stuff, about stopping, getting headspace? And particularly for teenagers, just the importance of doing stuff that is just fun, and our teens, again, they can teach us a lot about that, because they're much better at having fun than we are as adults, but making sure that they are exploring and being creative with how to do that in this weird new phase. And as the lockdown restrictions start to allow a little bit more in those terms, then be creative about how you do that. If you can meet with one friend outdoors, do it. Go for some walks, go for a bike ride. My daughter was playing cards from 2 meters away from her best mate yesterday, doing stuff like that, because that connection, that social contact is so important in the teenage years.
Amazing. Okay, last question. If somebody's listening to this and thinking this is really helpful, but I am just really at the point of overwhelm, or I'm really feeling like I'm beginning to struggle, or we are really... the waves are coming over the head now. What's the signpost for them? Where do we go with that?
Yeah, and I think that it is important in the season that we recognise that, Andy. And again, actually, I've talked to more people in the last week, 10 days, who are in that space. And I think what's difficult for a lot of people, and what I've again heard a lot, is people saying, I thought this would be an easier phase, but actually it's hit me harder than I ever expected. So just first of all, recognizing that this is a challenging stage. We might think that because we're going back to normal, it should be easy. And I think if we get into a pattern of beating ourselves up about what we're feeling, that's never helpful. So recognizing that what you're feeling is okay to feel it, and you need some extra support with it. That's important. I think the first point of contact for people if they're struggling is to get in touch with their GP and have a chat. There is more support out there than you might think. And there are people who you can talk to. There are things that your GP can do to help you get through this season and to give you extra support that takes you through this stormy time. And the key thing is not to wait until you've hit the point of complete breakdown. It is to sort of to flag up that you're struggling before you get to that point. And so many times that's what we do. What we do is we live life on the edge, but we're thinking, as long as I've not totally broken down, then that's okay. But let's be kinder to ourselves than that and say, actually, do I need some support to get through this? Is there a better way of doing this season? Because it isn't going to be just another week or another 2 weeks. We don't know how long this season is going to last, and we need to be kind to ourselves so that we can do it in the best way possible for ourselves, but also for the people that we're caring for. Most of the people I've spoken to who are finding this particularly hard are people who do have other responsibilities. So we need to recognize that in order to be the person that other people need us to be, we actually need to look after ourselves as well. And that may mean having a conversation with your GP and starting to get the ball rolling to get some good support.
Thank you. That's been absolutely amazing. So helpful. Just like, what's the phrase? Drinking water out of a fire hydrant. Just so good. If people want to hear more from you, where can they do that? Where have you got your resources? What can you point us to?
Yeah, I would massively encourage people to head to our website. It's the Mind and Soul Foundation website, which is Mind and Soul Foundation, all as one word, .org. We're also on all the main social media spaces, Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, at Mind and Soul UK. And we're on YouTube as well. And I personally put out a short video every Sunday on YouTube, but you'll see regular posts across on the website, but also across all of our social media. At the moment, we are very active in this season and drawing in expertise and wisdom from all kinds of different amazing people. So if you're looking for ideas, thoughts, inspiration, or just tips and tricks for how to manage some of the difficulties of this season, you'll find loads of useful stuff there.
So mindandsoulfoundation.org.
That's right, yeah, or at Mind and Soul UK.
We'll put that all in the links. Wherever we put this, we'll put that link there. Kate, thank you so much for your time.
That's great.
Brilliant to have you. Thank you.
Great. Thank you very much.